Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, RapidMiner 9.3 for Partners. I'm Haley Matissa with RapidMiner, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'm joined today by Tobias Malbrecht and Lars Borrelé from our RapidMiner Product Team. They'll get started in just a few minutes, but first, a few quick housekeeping items for those on the line. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the on-demand version via email within 1 to 2 business days. You're free to share that link with colleagues who are not able to attend today's live session. Second, if you have any trouble with audio or video today, your best bet is to try logging out and logging back in, which should resolve the issue in most cases. And finally, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Please feel free to ask questions at any time via the questions box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So I'll now go ahead and pass it over to Tobias to get us started.
Yep, thank you, Haley. Yeah, so welcome to this partner webinar. I have the pleasure to run you through the new release, RapidMiner 9.3, that we have launched last week. So let's get right into it. But before we start with looking at the features that we have delivered, I would like to give you a little bit of background on what the purpose or the goal of the release was. So in the past couple of quarters, actually, what we see more and more really in companies is that analytics is really a team sport, ranging from business analysts who are evaluating opportunity for the business that could be unlocked through analyzing data, down to the data science experts that are deep into coding and implementing optimized models. And it's really important to drive the productivity of such teams. And that basically has two elements: driving the potential for the individual users based on the individual needs of that role, but also then driving the productivity of those heterogeneous teams, basically. And yeah, this is really one element that we had in mind when designing this release. So that's really one of the goals that we had with this release, to drive the productivity of heterogeneous analytics teams. The second goal of the release is more addressed at the larger enterprise companies. So they really have specific needs around how they need to deploy a data science platform. There are certain requirements around scalability, resilience, around the integration of the platform into the IT landscape and infrastructure enterprises already have in place most of the time. So there are those specific needs, and we address a couple of these specific needs in this release as well, and yeah, really drive the adaptability of RapidMiner for those larger enterprises. So with that, let's quickly look into the actual capabilities that we do deliver. The first one is around the AutoModel. So you might be familiar with the AutoModel in Studio. Now, so far, it was really a productivity tool for the individual user on RapidMiner Studio. But there was one flaw, basically. The flaw was that it was only executing locally on RapidMiner Studio. So it couldn't really scale up to the large amounts of data you might have, or even be speeded up by using a powerful architecture at the back end. So this is what we address with RapidMiner 9.3. A second element of this release is really around the integration of RapidMiner and Python. So Python is really being universally adopted. It's really a kind of a huge trend. And one of the goals we really have is to make use of that and allow users to use RapidMiner and Python in conjunction, but also different user types, those using RapidMiner predominantly and those rather coding in Python, on the other hand, collaborate. The third element of this release are some productivity enhancements and time series enhancement that I will walk you through. And then there are two other new capabilities that speak more to this enterprise element that I was mentioning before. One is around managing data connectivity, so connectivity to data sources like databases at scale. What does it mean? Well, it should scale up to a large number of users on the one hand, but also to a large number of data connections on the other hand, and make it really comfortable to manage those connections in with respect to those two dimensions. Then finally, we also added an improvement regarding user authentication, and we have realized by talking to our customers that many of them actually have kind of a centralized authentication component in place that should actually do all kind of user authentication within the enterprise. So integrating with such component is really a pressing need, so that this user authentication can happen in a compliant way within the enterprise, and really all the user kind of authentication is centrally managed within that component. So yeah, as the fifth component here, we really integrated with that paradigm and provided this capability. So let's look at those new capabilities a little bit more detail, and let's start with scaling the AutoModel. What is really the benefit here? Well, the benefit is that you can now scale automated machine learning with AutoModel to really large data sets, as you can offload the computationally intensive parts to RapidMiner server. So when you go through that workflow of AutoModel, you can basically select whether you would like to execute the modeling task either locally in RapidMiner Studio or on a RapidMiner server that you have deployed. So, and with that, yeah, it scales up to much larger data sets. It also accelerates the model training. Why? Because on Studio, it was basically running all models sequentially, one after the other. Now, with a large distributed server architecture, you can obviously make easier use of parallelization of those tasks. So what happens is basically that if you have set up RapidMiner server in the right way, those modeling jobs will essentially execute in parallel, so that is much faster to execute all those models than it would be on Studio. Well, and with that, it obviously also happens that you free up actually your Studio to work on something else in parallel while those modeling jobs are running on a backend server. So this really scales up AutoModel to a server architecture, and with that provides a great productivity benefit for the individual users using AutoModel. There are a couple of smaller AutoModel capabilities that I would like to mention here as well. For instance, you get quick access to recent data and results. There is now some improved tracking capability, as the number of models that is computed in such a task, in such a job, is output. There's now a better selection of text columns if you have textual columns in there, and there's now also a new algorithm for calculating weights. What also comes with the AutoModel as it runs on server, by the way, is that results are persisted on server to go back later. So that might be actually relevant. So you can also have multiple AutoModel jobs basically run, and all those produce results, and you can expect them later. So it's really more kind of a model factory approach that we are aiming for or aiming towards. Let's look a little bit at the second new capability here, and that is a big step forward in terms of doing data science with RapidMiner in conjunction with Python. And what do we really mean here? Well, first of all, we see that many of our individual users actually already use RapidMiner and Python to really increase their individual productivity. So they might do some parts in RapidMiner and some parts in Python. And with this release, we really try to make this a lot more seamless so that you can really go back and forth. Let's say do the data prep part in RapidMiner, then do some data exploration in Python, or do some modeling in Python, or do that in RapidMiner, wherever you want, basically. So you can really augment your RapidMiner tool set with anything that you can do in Python and use Python whenever there's a need to. So yeah, really using RapidMiner and Python in combination is what we aim for, and allowing the individual user to select the best approach for the task at hand. But not only for the individual users, there's a lot of benefit here. We also aimed at enabling collaboration between the RapidMiner user who's mostly working code-free, but also then the coding data scientist who's essentially coding in Python. That's a lot. That's a quite common scenario we see also in smaller and larger corporations, really, is where you have different types of users. So it's really important for them to, hand off results from one party to the other party. The way we do that, there are actually two elements here that we deliver with this release. The first one is the existing execute Python operator can now also execute IPython notebooks. So whenever you have some notebook created in Jupyter, for instance, then you can now embed execution of that notebook within your RapidMiner process. You can even select which cells you would like to execute if you have them tagged in Jupyter, for instance, in the right way. The data transfer, though, still happens kind of via this RapidMiner main method that you are probably used to when you use the execute Python operator with a script file, for instance. The second element that really drives this benefit that we aim for here is we now provide a RapidMiner Python library that allows to interact with RapidMiner, with the RapidMiner platform from Python. And what does interact mean? Well, there are a couple of elements here. You can load data from the RapidMiner repository into a Python pandas data frame just by basically executing a short method call. And you can also store data back from Python into RapidMiner. Second, you can execute a RapidMiner process from Python with just one method call. You can also hand over data or pass over data to that process execution as input, and all the results that are produced by the process are actually then transferred back to Python. Third, this library also makes it possible to integrate with our real-time scoring product. So whenever you have a model deployed on real-time scoring agents for really short latency kind of scoring and in a high volume scenario, then you can now call this this model from Python that sits on the real-time scoring engine. And for instance, with that, if you, let's say, have some folks working in RapidMiner producing models, they could expose that through the real-time scoring engine. And if there would be a different, let's say, data engineer who builds kind of a data engineering pipeline and would like to integrate that model, that could be a way to do that. Now, the integration, by the way, works with both RapidMiner Studio and Server. So if you are kind of working locally, then you can integrate that with Studio. All the calls, whether to load or store data or execute a process, basically spawn a Studio instance to serve that call. Or you could also connect to a server, and that server would then, that RapidMiner server would then basically serve those calls. Yeah, and with that integration, it's really kind of a nice and seamless integration to hand over and pass over results basically from RapidMiner to Python and vice versa. Let's quickly look at our time series and productivity enhancements. There are, as you might know, we have been on a journey to improve our time series capabilities since a couple of releases now. And this release is no exception to that. So there are a couple of new features that are centered mainly around forecasting. One is we provide now a simple naive kind of forecasting operator that provides a naive forecast. Why do that and not use a more sophisticated thing here? Well, it could provide kind of a performance benchmark that you would do at the beginning of your analysis, so that you get kind of a baseline performance, and then you can easier judge kind of improvements that you make by using more sophisticated algorithms. Second, and that's actually the third point on this slide here, there is a new forecasting operator that uses or that fits polynomial functions to the time series by separating it first into a trend component and seasonal components, and then fitting those functions individually, basically, and combining that into a forecast. And third, it's easier to understand now periodic patterns in time series, as there's now a new operator that allows to calculate autocorrelation, autocovariance, and the like. There are also a couple of productivity enhancements that we deliver with RapidMiner 9.3. One of those is that our write Excel operator can now actually write multiple data sets into one Excel file. It doesn't sound like very significant, but it's actually quite a good improvement, as we see many of our users share results via Excel files. And obviously, packaging many of those results into one Excel file can really provide a great benefit here in such processes where you share those results via Excel. Just for the sake of completeness, you might know that in the RapidMiner 9.2 release, we actually provided completely new visualizations. So far, they were not included in TurboPrep, but with RapidMiner 9.3, we have actually integrated them into TurboPrep as well, so that all the charts are really now unified throughout TurboPrep and the core or remainder of RapidMiner Studio. Last but not least, there are a few other notable enhancements that I just wanted to show here. Really small tweaks and improvements here and there that really are aimed at providing more productivity, making things faster, easier, accelerate usage basically, and really provide more productivity for the individual user. With that, let's move a little bit to the enterprise capabilities that we deliver in that release. And the first one, and this is really a significant one, that is we improve connecting to data, as we have completely reworked the way how you do that. So what are the benefits here really that we have in mind by doing that? The first one is we wanted teams to improve collaboration as they connect to data. So it's now really possible to set up a data connection only once and share it really, really easily with whoever needs access across your team, just by setting the appropriate permissions to those data source connections. Second, I already mentioned kind of the scalability requirement in the enterprises. And here we also aimed at providing a really scalable solution that satisfies those enterprise needs by allowing to create connections only once and then reuse them at any time in whatever context, and make that really easy and productive. Still, obviously, as we are talking about enterprises, their concern is often security, compliance, and the like. So the whole framework also complies to that. So sharing connections is completely secure. You can actually hide details as you want, so that you can keep credentials really safe, even if you share a connection to be used by somebody else. Second, it really also complies with any policies you might have within your enterprise. So there are often different ways how connectivity to data sources is set up or facilitated within enterprises. Most typical way is there is a function account that is used by applications or multiple users to connect to a database. Now, that might not be the most secure way but sometimes that's how it is, and we already supported that before. But often it's also the case that actually each user has their own credentials to connect to a particular database, right? And this is now possible to do in RapidMiner as well quite easily, so that you have a kind of a common template for the connection, and then you can, or each user can basically pass in their own user credentials. Last but not least, it's really flexible in the sense that there can be kind of many solutions to different authentication and authorization paradigms and needs. Last but not least, it also speeds up the whole data science deployment process, as it's now way easier to move processes from one server to a different server, let's say from a development instance to a test or QA instance to a production instance. And finally, the whole framework is now much more open to be extended and customized. So whenever there's a need to adapt this framework, let's say to a new type of data sources, we on our end, or you as partner, can do that with a little bit of coding effort. So it's much more flexible than before. Now let's look a little bit at how this thing looks like actually. First, there's kind of a shift of paradigm a little bit, because now connections are stored in the repository and they are actually objects. So that means you can see them here in the repository, and you can also drag them into a process which basically enters an operator that loads the connection, and then you can use that connection in any operator that actually does the connection and loads data from somewhere, for instance, from Salesforce. Now, what does that enable? Well, it's really easy to move connections around, copy and paste them, let's say from one repository to another repository, from one server to a different server. And you can also easily share them by just setting the appropriate permissions. Second, there's really a great new capability here, as you can either fully define a connection or just define a connection template and define some of the connection parameters as injectable. What does that mean? Well, it offers a lot of flexibility to change connections after the definition of them. So there is basically a definition phase of the connection. That's when you define them once, and then you use them at some later point in time. And now you can really adapt them or modify them in between. Now, what's the benefit of that? Well, first, it enables things like having credentials or different credentials for each user. So let's say I have different credentials than my colleagues, so you would just define a template, and then we would basically fill in the credentials when needed. Second, it's also possible basically to integrate with that way to external services, let's say, that manage or store credentials, let's say in a system like CyberArk or some Active Directory or LDAP implementation. So basically a two-level approach, authentication approach here is possible with that as well. So and there are many ways how such parameters can be injected into a connection, to make kind of a connection dynamic to various needs. So you can really dynamically adapt the connection. For instance, at runtime, you can implement things like user-based authentication and authorization. You can implement even a totally different authentication workflow. So it's really, really possible by adding those kind of sources of parameters. We have a few predefined of that. For instance, parameters can come from process macros. There's a new server vault. But such provider sources can also add it by some little bit of coding. Last but not least, there is now a new kind of vault capability in RapidMiner Server that can store such user-level credentials. And with that, it's really possible to provide things like user-based authentication, or for instance, ensure that I always connect to a different schema than somebody else, and things like these is possible. And another use case of that is that it's now quite easy to set it up in a way that you can easily copy a process from a development instance to a production instance, and you don't need to adapt the particular process as you do that, just because the connections are basically defined differently on those two environments using this server vault capability. With that, let's move into the second enterprise topic, which is enterprise user authentication with SAML 2.0. And what is the benefit of that? I already mentioned before that a lot of companies typically have kind of an enterprise identity provider already in place that centrally manages users or stores users and authenticates users whenever they want to access a so-called service provider, basically some kind of resource like a RapidMiner server, right, that you would want to use. And since companies have that, it's a requirement often nowadays as for a software like RapidMiner to integrate with these identity providers. And that is exactly what we do here. And the way we do that is through a protocol which is called SAML 2.0, which is kind of a standard authentication protocol. Now, what is really the benefit that comes with that? Well, the benefit is that each company can implement their own preferred security policy. That could be that users are asked to just enter a username and password. That could mean that they need to enter a token they got from somewhere. That could even mean that there is now a multi-factor authentication. So you might be aware of mechanisms like for Google or Apple accounts where you have to enter your user credentials and afterwards you are sent some code or a transaction number to your phone that you have to enter additionally in a second step. And that is often even what companies want to do and implement, and they can do that within their identity provider. And now RapidMiner can integrate with that. Another benefit here is that this setup allows to set up things like single sign-on, so that people only would need to have to log in once, basically, and they're also logged in all the time. So a common scenario here might be that you would want to attach RapidMiner or the RapidMiner user authentication, for instance, to logging into your Microsoft account. So then it would work that once you connect from RapidMiner Studio to RapidMiner Server, it would pop up a login screen, but that login screen would actually be the login for your Microsoft account. And once you log in there, you're also logged into RapidMiner Server. And that's really the benefit that is provided here. Just quickly, very rough how that works. So basically, whenever some user sits in front of Studio, wants to access RapidMiner Server, it makes that request. RapidMiner Server knows, oh, this user might not be or is not logged in yet, so it will reach out to the identity provider. That identity provider brings up the login screen to the user. So that's not on RapidMiner behalf, but it's really that identity provider. The user authenticates there or enters credentials there. The identity provider authenticates the user and says, yeah, okay, that's this user. It passes the token back to RapidMiner Server, and then basically RapidMiner Server knows, okay, this user is logged in, so I let the user access the resource of RapidMiner Server. Yeah, with that, there are multiple use cases possible. It still integrates with LDAP, so we had an LDAP integration before, but now this LDAP could basically be used as a database for the identity providers to store all the data. So the integration would work through that way. I already mentioned that it's possible now to implement kind of a single sign-on scenario. A thing like multi-factor authentication would work now. Now here you see some or some QR code that is used in that process. So it's really flexible to set things up for authentication here. And it really now, through using that transparent authentication protocol SAML, you can now really integrate with any kind of service that does authentication. And integrates also with that server, whether it's your Microsoft account or your Google account or AWS or whatnot. So it's really flexible in that regard. And with that, yeah, thanks for listening into the RapidMiner number 3 features. And I think we'll have some Q&A later, I guess. Back to you, Haley.
I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lars.
All right, thank you, Tobias, and thanks, Haley. Then we'll talk about the new packaging and pricing, and I'll go through a few topics here, some of the reasons why we made these changes, and then we'll dive into them as it relates to the different products, and finish up with some of the regional pricing pieces there that as it relates to it. So. The reason we looked over and started to think about how to change the packaging and in particular the pricing was that we were finding that in some cases customers were churning, and what could we do about that? Also, how can we get to more multi-year type of contracts? Also, the server, and in particular, this is a big driver for the change in the pricing on the server side, is that it's been now evolved over the last couple of years into an architecture that allows it to be run across multiple machines and instances, right? It's really both vertically and horizontally distributable or scalable. And let's make the pricing match that more instead of the instance-based pricing we had before with the small, medium, and large. What we'll also try to do then is increase a bit the commitment that people need to do in buying a single seat or a couple of seats of studio. Again, to get more buy-in from the company, drive more success down the line by having more engagement and more of a commitment into the product. So those sort of drivers then led to the following changes, and I'll go into each of those in detail in a second. So one thing here is to drive towards multi-year deals. What's good with that is it gives us and you guys all to partners and the customer more time to succeed. Then with the 1-year term, you might not have really come to realize some of the value, and people get detracted or want to try something else. But if we stick with it for a little longer, often the value can be realized and renewals are more likely. So we've also now priced the product so that if you buy by 3 years, you get more discount. The servers then will be sold in what we call a unit, and that's based on the number of cores and RAM that fits into one of those units. They will be charged at $36,000 per unit and year with the 3-year term, and I'll dive into the details there. We have changed the offerings for Studio and reduced them from the small, medium, and large into a professional and an enterprise edition. And finally, then we simplified the Radu pricing. All the users are priced the same, even the first user. But let's get into the server then. So the new server architecture is much more enterprise ready. It can scale, support HA and failover, and also now deployable via Docker and using Kubernetes. So there's good documentation and images for those that makes it quite easy to deploy across multiple machines. The old server was more of a monolith, or a single server, could scale vertically, but you couldn't really run multiple of them side by side. But that's, with the new architecture, then that's been addressed. So the new packaging here will, take more advantage of the fact that we can scale across multiple machines. So what you will then now have is a packaging which we call then there's a server unit, or a RapidMiner server unit. It then holds or contains 64 gigabytes of RAM and 8 logical processors. But this is just a sort of virtual, or should I say, a definition of what a unit is. Now, you can actually, what it means is really that you have the right to run RapidMiner servers on 64 gigabytes and 8 cores. And you can actually deploy those gigabytes and those cores across any number of machines. And I'll go through a few examples here of what could be done. But this will allow a customer to buy, let's say, 128 gigabytes of RAM and 16 cores, and then distribute that on 4 machines or 8 machines or 2 machines, whatever is suitable for their use case, right? So we make it very flexible here. You really buy a capacity, and then you can use that as you see fit. The incentive to do 3-year terms, you can see here as well. That's $36,000 per unit. If you sell just a 1-year term, the price is pretty much 50% higher. So we try to really drive now towards the 3-year term, more flexibility in your deployment options, so that you can scale as needed. So it's more flexible, as I described, scales with the way people do things in IT nowadays. You can horizontally expand without driving and forcing new licensing and so on. So it should be a good bit easier. So one case here, maybe there's a handful of data scientists that are running various modeling jobs, scheduling recurring process runs, and so on. They could, in this case, then buy, let's say, 24 logical processors and 192 gigabytes, and they want to deploy that over 3 machines. So they're buying 3 units, but as you can see, I could deploy it over more machines than 3, but in this case, there's also 3 machines, but they're different size. Like I'm running the main server on 1 machine, 32 gigabytes and 4 logical processors. Then I've set up another machine that's quite large for bigger modeling runs. And then I have another one that's a bit smaller that I might use for more scheduled jobs and so on. So in this case, then they would need the total of 3 server units in order to get enough gigabytes and processors. So they would buy 3 of those then. And to, again, reiterate the fact that you can deploy whatever you buy across any number of machines. So in this case, even if you buy a single unit, you could deploy that on 2 machines, let's say. Now, we do recommend that you don't really go much lower than 32 gigabytes, but in some cases, maybe you do anyway. But in this case, then you can see I run half of it on the main server, and then I've set up another job agent for the other half of the RAM. Another situation might be to set up some development, test, and production environments. And in this case, an HA or high availability backup unit is set up in the production configuration. So I would go through here, calculate my total required RAM and number of processors. In this case, then 48 processors and 384 gigabytes of RAM. Well, that would then equal 6 of these RapidMiner server units. And then you can do the rest of the calculation there. If I buy a 3-year term, that would be 36,000 per unit. 6 of those units then would add up to 216,000 per year. So again, here I'm deploying across a number of machines, 7 in total, but I'm using 6 units. So the unit is really, again, just a capacity that you have bought, and you can then split that capacity whichever way you see fit. Just to then remind you too about the real-time scoring server. So in this scenario here, I have a development environment, and then I've set up a scoring environment for low latency scoring using the real-time scoring server. And in this case, then I would need 3 server units for the development environment there. But then I'm deploying or running in production the scoring units, and those are, a little bit different configuration. But then again, the pricing there is as well 36 per year. But the RAM configurations are as before. You should probably look into this again if you're not familiar with the real-time scoring server. And there we have different types of units, something called a base unit. And you can add additional units on top of that, and then we have something that's also related to less use, or a peak unit, we call that. But that's a different conversation. But I just wanted to point out here that the combination of these things still work, and that you would then price out the pieces for the base server, any job agents, and then there's a different SKU for the scoring server. So with this new pricing, then obviously there will be potentially some discussion around how much you should propose. So discuss the setup, right? What do you actually need here? What will the architecture of that server setup be? Do I need a development, test, and production? Do I want some high availability or not? Do they need any scoring? In that case, you should use that SKU as well. And then, then we'll find out how many logical processors and RAM you might need. If it's a brand new customer, obviously you just figure all this out. If it's an existing customer and you want to sell them something new or renew, in that case, we also need to figure out what they're using today. So they might have bought a large server in the past. Well, since that had unlimited amount of RAM and logical processors, we need to figure out how much they need actually going forward now, because since we don't have this idea of the unlimited anymore, that needs to then get converted into X number of units. So do that translation then. Either it's a new architecture of what you need, or it's a combination of your old stuff and what you want to set up going forward. And then offer the 3-year commitment. That will reduce the overall cost, and as we mentioned before, give everybody an opportunity to really succeed with the projects. What to think about here then, and we'll work with you on that from a sales support perspective, is depending on what the customers bought in the past with the large server and how much RAM and cores they use, it could be that all of a sudden it costs a lot more? Well, then let's discuss some further discounting so that this becomes a transition that the customer can feel comfortable with. But do that together with Dylan and Fred and so on, and can figure that out. Yeah. All right. On the studio side, then we have now reduced it to 2 editions. So if you look at this table here, on the left, then we have the old model with the free studio, the small, medium, and large, and then we had something called non-commercial, which was for academics or educational purposes. And now we have the new offerings. We still have the free, but then we have something called professional, which is capacity-wise equal to the small studio. Now we have increased the pricing here, and that again is to drive more towards a commitment from the customer and really make sure people do get into this for the right reasons. So it starts then at $5,000 for a 3-year term. We removed the medium offering because we want to, if people are really using a fair amount of data, get them up to the enterprise edition, and that then is priced at $10,000 per year, or for a 3-year term. And that's again the same configuration as large in the past. It's unlimited in the rows and processors and has all the features. For academics, then we have that offering available too, and that's also an unlimited edition. Has all the features and functions and scale elements. So going forward, then we'll offer professional and enterprise. Radu, here the change is quite simple. Basically, we're just removing that first user price we used to have. So now everybody will be the same. Any user that wants to use Radu then is the $5,000 per user per year for a 3-year term. So that should simplify that conversation. Okay, and then lastly, some of the regional pricing then. So what I showed before were then the pricing for the Americas and APAC. And then we have slightly different pricing than in EMEA. It's a little bit of an uplift there of about 10%. Okay, good. Last thing then before we jump into questions, there'll be a webinar, and I think Fred and those guys will talk a little bit more about this opportunity coming up. So with that, I'll hand over to you.
Why, thank you, Lars. So we do plan to continue to provide support and education continuously into the field, and our next event to help you keep up to speed with RapidMiner is on June the 26th. That's at 8 a.m. Pacific. If I do my math correctly, that's 11 a.m. Eastern, and 4 p.m. UK, 5 p.m. 1700 European time. The session will be recorded. And the plan for this next session is to lead you through our new sales presentation and company messaging. We've been spending a lot of time recently refining and honing the messaging, especially around our differentiation and especially around the concept of the center of excellence as a key activity that can be used to drive the customer to enterprise levels with large deployments. So we'll present a new sales presentation. We've also started doing a lot of work in verticalizing our messaging. So you will see on the event on the 26th some new industry and functional use cases documented for you to use in the field. We'll also launch our new standard RapidMiner demo that you can use. This will help you to draw out those key differentiators and to have the customer understand the true value of RapidMiner. As I mentioned, our new COE-based sales methodology will bring you up to speed on that. And then, as you mostly all know already, we have been spending a lot of time building out our Academy website and a whole set of new education assets. So you'll learn a little bit more about what we're doing during the session on the 26th. And importantly, we'll tell you some more information on our revised certification process. This is important from a number of standpoints because it's our new certification process for partners, but also for customers. Much lighter weight, much more granular, and we think will help you in the field to drive customers to be real experts in RapidMiner. And then last but not least, our partner portal is going through an upgrade this week. We'll bring you up to speed with updates on the partner portal. We'll finish by adding the L to the word portal. It will roll out around the end of this week, and we'll show you the new features and how you can get the best out of the content that's there. This event is an event that requires registration, not surprisingly. The link is on the screen. The link will obviously go out with the recording, and I think we'll email it rather than have to type that back in. So please do register. It will of course be recorded and also made available to you, as is this current session. Thank you, Lars. So I shall hand back now to Haley, because I believe there is a number of questions that are coming in from the partners.
Sure. Yeah, we can go ahead and address those. I just wanted to let everyone know I did post the link to register in the chat, so you guys should be able to see that, and that's actually a clickable link. So if you'd like to register now for that event, we will also be emailing you, as Fred said. So let's go ahead and get to the questions. The first question I see is, will current perpetual license customers have any impact on their configuration when updating RapidMiner server, the version?
Okay, good question. I can take that then. So yeah, no, it wouldn't be any change. If the current perpetual customer upgrades and installs the new server, it will still sort of work with their current licensing. Now, you might want to engage there and think about if there's some opportunity to get them on a term license again, but maybe not. So yeah, there won't be any immediate impact on them, even if they upgrade their server. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Fred, as it relates to how to engage with such a customer.
No, I think that's a good answer, Lars. We need to be situationally aware with every single customer. We will obviously, on the subscription side, also have renewals coming up where the customer may have perhaps bought a Studio Medium license, or maybe a customer is looking to buy some additional licenses and is not aware that the price book has changed. So our sales teams and customer success teams will work with partners on a case-by-case basis, especially around those renewals or upsell opportunities. From the sales standpoint as well, the new pricing takes place immediately, but we are aware that you will have some opportunities where the existing pricing has been already quoted against the old price book. We will honor those within the the normal quote validity period. We certainly ourselves put a 1 month validity on our quotes, but we'll certainly continue to honor existing quotations up until the end of July. But again, if you do find you have customers, for example, with RFPs or RFIs, where we've had to give pricing commitments that are longer than those periods, again, please do contact your salesperson or myself or Dylan or indeed any member of the team to ask advice, and we'll work out for you the best approach going forwards. Sorry, Lars, that was a fairly long answer to a simple question.
No, very good. Thank you. We can take, we'll do a couple more questions then. So there was one here around, does test or dev units, are they licensed as well? And okay, so this question comes up now and then. Yeah, the way we treat whether you're doing production or developing and building and generating models or doing testing, we basically charge the same across those activities. Because it's actually pretty hard to distinguish between, let's say, at least development of a model and maybe putting it into production, right? I mean, when you are working with data science and building a model, I mean, you're actually doing the work, right? It's so in that case, we don't have different types of pricing for dev, test, production, or any other sort of kind of shades of use. Now you can obviously discuss with the prospect and think a little bit about how to support them best, and maybe they feel they need some test server that they don't use as heavily as the others and want a discount on that. Sure, do what makes sense here, but we don't officially list different pricings for those things. All right, here's another question then. Do we still have Radu pricing based on nodes? Okay, good question. In general then, with new prospects, we try to sell it using this per user pricing. But I do know that we, in the back pocket here, also can offer node pricing. And in those cases, bring it up with Fred or Dylan, and we can work with Steve as well here, who heads up all of the sales organization then in coming up with that type of pricing. Yeah. So we have that, we used to have it, and we still have it in the back of the books, so to speak.
Hey Lars, it's Fred. I'll just add one thing.
Yeah.
You have, just as we used to have a partner guideline on pricing, which does summarize the pricing, a useful PDF document that shows the pricing for each region. And that does include guidelines on pricing, but it also includes the Radu node-based pricing within it. So we will be sending out as a useful guide to you all that price book. We'll make it available via the partner portal, and that will cover all of the pricing against the current price book for you. Thank you, Lars.
All right, good. I think it was the last question here, if there's any possibility to share this presentation. Yeah, the first part that Tobias went through there on the features and functions and all the good new stuff there, for sure, don't hesitate to share that with people. Now, the pricing part here is obviously sensitive from a competitive perspective. So not sure what you mean by sharing, but please, keep that within yourselves. And as Fred mentioned, there will be an updated document with all that information in it too, for you guys to be able to, within your team, to know what's going on and how to price and do all that. Yeah.
I see one more question that just came in. And as a reminder, to add on to what Lars just said, we will be sending a recording of this presentation. So if you want to send a recording of our product team giving this demonstration, sure, you can go ahead and send that. We'll send a follow-up email within the next few business days. And I'll just go ahead and read this question because I saw it come through. So the question is, what is the recommended solution for former Studio Medium customers? New Enterprise is 2 times the cost, but Pro is 1/10 of the capacity.
Yeah, a great question. So, and this is where we see some nice opportunity actually to upsell the customer. So I think then Enterprise will probably be the preferred solution, but since it is twice as expensive, yeah, maybe it's hard to get that out, but maybe you can actually up the price a little bit. Maybe you can negotiate to a $7,500. So that's the idea a little bit behind this too. We have a limited number of medium users actually in general, so that's also why we're sort of stopping this particular offering. But those that are there, you could potentially upsell. Now their license will continue to work as is, so we haven't sort of removed these licenses from the licensing check mechanism. So they will continue to run until the end of their term. But at that point, then it becomes a conversation in which version or edition of the product you want or need at that time, and then that can be negotiated a bit around the price. Hopefully that answered your question.
Great, thanks, Lars. So if you guys had questions that you maybe didn't ask in the questions box, that's fine. You can reach out to your partner representative and they can go ahead and answer any questions for you. We will be sending a recording of today's presentation as a reminder. And I just want to thank everyone for the product team. Thanks again for the presentation, and thanks again to the partner team.
All right, thank you, Haley.